Hello and welcome. Today I'm really excited to showcase 4 really cool effects racks for Ableton Live that are specifically designed to make your drums sound really cool. The 4 effects racks we're going to look at is the Kick Shaper, the Snare Shaper, Drum Glue and Parallel Slap. So let's get into it. First up we have the Kick Shaper, and I've designed this rack so you can shape any style of kick drum, whether it's a live kick or a synthetic kick. And I have lots of kick drums here set up already to showcase, so let's have a listen to them. So a collection of very different sounding kick drums. But let's have a play around with the first one. We'll turn the Kick Shaper on, and currently the effects rack is initialized. But what we're able to do with this, we can change the input gain and the tuning of the kick drum. I've included a tilt EQ so we can either bass boost or increase the highs of the kick drum. We've got a dial called the Beef, which, well, as you'll hear as we go along, it basically gives us a lot more energy in the kick drum sound. We've got hard saturation if you want to get into hard style and gabba style kicks. Pre and post saturation. We can tighten up the kick drum if we want to make it a little bit more refined and shorter. We can scoop the kick. We can shape the transients, and we have a dial at the end to make it even louder if you want to. So let's have a play around with the different settings on this first kick drum. I've also included some presets as well, which I've optimized to work with as many different kick drum sounds as possible. So the first preset we've got is called Power. Second preset called Strong Tight. And the last preset for Hardstyle. And we can initialize the entire thing back to its basic settings. But I'm going to set this one to Strong Tight, and we're going to play through all of the kick drums. But before we do, if I just turn the rack off and play these last 3, which are mainly live kick drums. Now let's turn the rack on. As you can hear, the difference is massive, and again, this rack works for any style of kick drum. And again, with all of these different dials, you can tweak the settings and fine tune it as much as possible so you can get the best out of any kick drum sample that you might be working with. So that's the Kick Shaper. Let's move on to the Snare Shaper. So I've loaded in 9 very different sounding snare samples here, just to showcase again, like the Kick Shaper, this can work with pretty much any style of snare. And this rack, in a similar way to the kick, can shapen up the snares that you're working with. They can either tighten them, and I've explored this more in a sense where you can deaden the top end a little bit, you can make them into complete slap kind of snare sounds, and you can pitch these as well as just massively boosting the signal. So if we play around with the first 3, which are just live snare drums. And what I'll do for the first one is we're going to go through each of the presets. Again, you can fine tune all of the settings in this. So we have input gain, we have tuning, we have the amount of punch, the overall tone of the snare, smoothing the high end, tightening so we can basically shorten or lengthen the snare drum sound, compression slap, and then overall boost of level as well. But with this first snare, let's go through all of the presets. Let's try with the second snare. Let's try with a more synthetic sounding snare drum. And I've included some synthwave snares as well, like the 80s sound. And again, we can fine tune all of the settings with all of the different dials within this as well. But I just want to showcase mainly the presets because I feel like the presets for this specifically came out really well. So that's the Snare Shaper. But let's move on to the two effects racks that I've made that can shape overall drum sounds, like a drum bus or all of your collected drums together. So first up we have the drum glue. And this is a multi-stage, multi-band compression unit that can basically either tighten up your drums or make them sound a lot more airier and loose. If you have a completely synthetic drum loop with no reverb sound to it, the looseness aspect when we get to that won't really work as well. But I'm going to apply this to an overall live drum sound. So the drums that we're going to work with is just a standard 140 break. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the presets here. The dials that we have to play with is the amount, so basically turning this up is how much it's going to glue the drums together. This is tight versus loose, which you will hear the effect of that massively when we get between these two presets here. We have the amount of stages of compression that are going to be happening, and then a final glue dial as well. So let's go through all of these settings. So initialized doesn't really change the sound of the drums at all. The subtle preset is very, very subtle, but it's just to give the tiniest amount of glue to the sound. But when we get to tight comp and airtime, that's when you really start to hear the effect of this. So let's play around with tight. It really tightens up the overall length of the drums. And it can be a really, really useful tool if you're finding your drums are a little bit too washed out. Then we have a compressed version of that tight as well. As you can hear, the difference is quite extreme. And then when we move to airtime as well. That's probably one of my favorite presets in this. Basically, it brings everything together and all of those sort of lower background airiness sounds that you have in like a live drum break. It brings it all a lot more to the surface. Let's try it with a second drum loop that we have over here, and I'll just go through the presets. And then another drum loop just to showcase again how much you can use this on lots of different styles and sounds of drum loops. So there you go, 5 really cool presets, and again you can change all of these to your liking as well if you want to fine tune. And the final one that I've got to showcase is called Parallel Slap. And this is basically just 2 dials. And think of this like a bit like a parallel compressor, but it's not exactly a parallel compressor. Under the hood is very, very complex what's going on. But yeah, so we have a dry wet value and we have the slap amount as well. What I'll do is I'll just play around with the dials to start with, and then we'll go through the presets. So if we just move back to the first drum loop that we had, I'm going to turn off the drum glue and let's just listen to the parallel slap by itself. So this one can bring a lot more life to your drums overall. And if we go to the final drum loop that has a lot more space in it, and let's hear the difference. And I have a few presets as well. So we have the initialized one, the subtle version, the beast mode, and parallel slap. And let's try that on the second drum loop I've got. So we'll start with the initialized one. Again, very, very subtle addition. Think of this effects rack as a way to bring a massive amount of life to your drums overall. And it works a little bit like a parallel compressor, but not exactly how a parallel compressor works. But again, it's just there to really bring some life to your drums. Let's have a look at the first drum loop with all of these different presets as well. So there we have it, a collection of 4 really cool Ableton Live effects racks for drums. The kick shaper, the snare shaper, parallel slap, and the drum glue. Now these all work with Ableton Live 11 Suite, version 11.3.25 and onwards, including Ableton Live 12 Suite. You can grab all of these from my Patreon. The link is in the description and also in the pinned comment as well. I hope you enjoyed this, I hope you have fun using these tools, and until next time, as always, God bless and goodbye.